San Francisco sits on one of the most beautiful natural harbors in the world, with weather that is mild almost every day of the year, and an economy powerful enough that the wider Bay Area produced about $1.5 trillion in output in 2024, putting it on the scale of a major national economy. Its cultural identity is the kind that the rest of the world has spent decades trying to imitate. By almost every measure that makes a city desirable, San Francisco has it. But while other cities with a fraction of its advantages were building world-class transit and dense walkable neighborhoods, San Francisco was making it illegal to build an apartment, spending $846 million a year on a homelessness crisis that kept getting worse, and allowing corruption to eat so thoroughly through City Hall that residents eventually used apps and public maps to report human waste on their streets. None of this happened by accident. It turns out there is a very specific way to get there. So, in case you want to do the same, congratulations. San Francisco has already worked out the blueprint. This is how to ruin a city. To ruin a city with San Francisco's advantages, you first need to find a single industry so dominant and culturally total that the city stops being able to imagine a version of itself without it. San Francisco had technology, and from the late 1990s onward, it handed the city over completely. Salesforce, Craigslist, and Twitter planted their flags in the city, venture capital flooded every corner of the economy, and tech salaries at the top rose faster than wages anywhere else in the country. San Francisco's income levels ranked among the highest of any major American metro, and the skyline filled with the glass towers of companies remaking the world from a few square miles of the California coast. What it created underneath all of that was a split city. At one end, a small population of engineers and venture capitalists earning more than most American cities had ever seen. At the other, the service workers, janitors, delivery drivers, and restaurant staff whose jobs existed to support the people on the first end. Teachers, nurses, artists, and public sector workers, who had formed the connective tissue of any functioning city, found themselves competing in a market built for someone else entirely, and most of them lost that competition. They left, or they stayed, crowded into smaller and smaller units, and the city that looked wealthier than it had ever been quietly became a place that only one kind of person could afford to call home. The tech bus protests of 2013 to 2016 made the dynamic impossible to ignore. Private shuttles from Google, Apple, and Genentech began using public Muni bus stops to ferry workers between San Francisco neighborhoods and Silicon Valley campuses, blocking city buses and delaying the transit that everyone else depended on. The image of a private tech shuttle sitting where public buses were supposed to stop while the city's working residents waited became one of the defining photographs of what San Francisco was becoming. When the industry shifted, everything shifted with it. Remote work and mass layoffs and artificial intelligence disruption moved through the tech sector in the same period. And because San Francisco had spent 2 decades building its entire commercial ecosystem around one type of worker, the city discovered it had built no floor underneath itself for when that worker stopped showing up. A city that hands its identity to one industry does not get to decide what happens when that industry changes its mind, and San Francisco was about to find out what it had built in the meantime. Once your dominant industry is driving up the cost of living beyond what most of the city's workers can manage, the next step is to make sure nothing gets built that could bring that cost back down. San Francisco pursued this with a level of regulatory creativity that the rest of the country spent years trying to fully understand. Restrictive zoning, environmental lawsuits, discretionary review processes, and homeowner association political pressure combined to block virtually every meaningful housing reform for decades. San Francisco was one of the few major California jurisdictions where discretionary review remained unusually powerful, meaning a single neighbor could stall a fully code-compliant housing project for years at no meaningful cost to themselves. In 2023, the city was permitting less than one housing unit per day, while the state had mandated 82,069 new homes by 2031, a target the city was nowhere near meeting. median home prices peaked at $1.7 million. Rents routinely exceeded $3,000 per month for a one-bedroom apartment, and housing costs consumed 30 to 40% of average household income for the people who could still afford to stay. California's Ellis Act gave landlords a mechanism to exit the rental business by evicting rent-controlled tenants, and eviction spikes tracked tech hiring cycles closely enough that residents could roughly predict when the next wave was coming. Historically working-class neighborhoods, the Tenderloin, the Mission District, Dogpatch, and the Western Addition, saw property values climb to levels that pushed out the communities that had defined them for generations. The people running the Planning Commission largely owned homes, which meant the regulatory system designed to protect neighborhood character was also a system that protected the asset values of the people operating it. The cost of building nothing was paid entirely by the people who needed somewhere to live, and they paid it for decades, which produced a downtown full of office buildings, and almost no one who could afford to live near them, and set up everything that came next perfectly. With the industry locked in and the housing frozen, the move that follows is almost inevitable. Make sure the downtown that depends on that industry has no resilience for when the industry changes its behavior. Before the pandemic, San Francisco's downtown handled roughly 550,000 people on any given weekday, a mix of commuters and tourists that kept cafes, bars, shops, and restaurants alive as a functioning commercial ecosystem. That number collapsed to 150,000 by 2022, and the commercial economy built around it collapsed with similar speed. By 2025, San Francisco's office vacancy rate was still above 30%, among the worst of any major American city, and more than double New York's rate of 14.8%. Westfield abandoned its flagship mall after foot traffic dropped 43%, defaulting on a $558 million loan on the way out. The San Francisco Center closed permanently in late January 2026, with Bay Area Rapid Transit sealing off its direct station entrance. Annual sales tax revenue dropped 22% between 2019 and 2022, and Mayor Daniel Lurie's budget pushed major cuts and job reductions as the city tried to close a large deficit. Every city that builds its downtown around a single sector is making a bet that sector will never leave. San Francisco made that bet with everything it had, and what remained when the bet went wrong was a question the city had no good answer for. How do you rebuild street life in a place where almost nobody can afford to live? Once the downtown is hollowing out, and the streets are filling with its consequences, the next thing to do is pour money into the visible symptoms without building anything capable of resolving them. The 2024 point-in-time count found 8,323 people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco, a 7.3% increase from 2022. The city had spent $846.3 million on homelessness in a single year, which critics reduced to roughly $100,000 per person counted as homeless, and new entries into homelessness continued to outpace exits into housing throughout. Overdose deaths reached 810 in 2023, one of the city's deadliest public health crises in recent memory, and by 2025 that number had fallen to 621, a real improvement reflecting a shift toward more treatment-focused policies, but still a figure carrying the weight of years during which open drug use had become normalized on public streets. In 2023, the city received tens of thousands of formal reports of human waste on public streets, enough that apps and public maps were developed so residents could tag and map the failures in real time. What made the visibility so politically damaging was the concentration rather than the scale. A handful of streets in the Tenderloin and Soma neighborhoods were filmed repeatedly and presented internationally as representative of the entire city. San Francisco's homelessness growth rate over 5 years was actually lower than the national average. But the combination of extreme visible suffering and extreme visible wealth concentrated in a few square miles created an image the city could not escape. and 6 in 10 residents reported feeling unsafe in 2023, despite far fewer homicides than 1996. That kind of gap between perception and data does not close on its own. It closes when institutions rebuild trust, and San Francisco's institutions were about to make that significantly harder. Spending nearly $1 billion a year on homelessness with limited results naturally raises a question about where the money is going. The next step is to make sure that question has a very uncomfortable answer. In January 2020, federal agents arrested Mohammed Nuru, the head of San Francisco's Public Works Department, on charges of bribery, kickbacks, and corruption. He was later convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison. And the investigation that followed led to charges against dozens of individuals and companies, including the city's former Public Utilities Commission general manager, who received 4 years. It was one of the largest municipal corruption scandals San Francisco had seen in decades. The nonprofit sector that the city relied on to deliver homeless services proved similarly compromised. HomeRise, a major city-funded housing provider, paid $200,000 in staff bonuses and handed executives 20% pay rises during the homelessness crisis it existed to address. The former chief executive of the United Council of Human Services was charged in 2026 with misappropriating over $1.2 million in public funds to finance a personal luxury lifestyle. Residents were watching tent encampments grow outside their windows, while confirmed reports of public money being stolen arrived in the news on a rolling basis, and the combination destroyed public trust in a way that simple failure never could have. In 2022, voters recalled 3 school board members and the district attorney. In March 2024, Proposition D passed with 88% in favor to tighten ethics laws and restrict gifts to officials. A city with a $15.9 billion annual budget had needed a near-unanimous vote to establish basic standards of public accountability. And the margin of that vote measured exactly how far things had been allowed to go. The final step is the simplest one. After all of that, what remains is to keep going. A city that has assembled everything above reaches a point where continuing in the same direction stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like the only available path. San Francisco reached that point and kept walking. San Francisco's transit agency, the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, faces annual budget gaps exceeding $300 million, with ridership at 75% of pre-pandemic levels. California approved a $590 million rescue loan to stabilize regional transit, repayable over 12 years, which critics described as a very expensive band-aid for a system that needed something more fundamental. The city operates on a total annual budget of $15.9 billion, spending roughly $18,000 per resident, among the highest of any major city in the United States, and produced a downtown vacancy rate above 30%. A homelessness crisis where critics reduced the spending to roughly $100,000 per person, counted as homeless, without the city delivering a clear resolution. And a housing shortage so severe the state had to mandate construction targets the city was not meeting. Los Angeles once had one of the largest electric rail systems in the world. Much of it was dismantled by the early 1960s, and Los Angeles is still rebuilding that network decades later at enormous cost. San Francisco carried none of that historical burden and still arrived at the same destination through different choices. Inside Walt Disney World in Orlando, a private entertainment company built functioning transit, walkable streets, and mixed-use environments that move millions of people daily without dysfunction. San Francisco, one of the richest urban economies on Earth, spent the same period adding obstacles faster than it could remove them. And the distance between those two outcomes is the story of this city in miniature. A February 2026 poll showed 64% of San Francisco residents feel the city is on the right track, up from 22% the year before. The visible street crisis has eased, new leadership has arrived with different priorities, and the fentanyl death toll is declining. However, the housing crisis remains unsolved. The downtown vacancy rate has not recovered, and the tech monoculture remains the foundation the city is standing on. Moving through a period of disruption no one fully understands yet. The structural conditions that produced the last decade are quieter, but quiet is a long way from being resolved. San Francisco's core failure as a city was that it consistently prioritized the financial comfort of existing homeowners over the housing needs of everyone else, built its entire economy around one volatile industry, and allowed the spending meant to address the resulting damage to flow through a system without enough accountability to deliver it. The geography is extraordinary, the Bay is still there, and the economy, even diminished, remains one of the largest on Earth. Whether San Francisco can build something worthy of all of that is the question its next decade will answer. And the last few decades make that optimism hard to take for granted.